It's another week. It's another Unlapped. Where in the world are Carmen Sandiego, Laurence, and Nate? I have a guess for Nate. Nate looks like he might be home.
Yep.
I think you're in Monaco, or Monaco adjacent. Anyway, welcome to Unlapped. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, like the video, duh. Also remember the new ESPN F1 YouTube channel, which is your place for all F1 content, not just during the season. Honestly, it's 365 days a year. And if you are ingesting, taking in this podcast in any other way or form, just like, give us like a 5-star review. Really, really basic. Let's get to it, guys. Our producers are once again being very needy. This is how they are. But let's be honest. Wait, hold on. How many seconds after the Colapinto crash did I hit up our WhatsApp chat? I was like, think we can pencil this in for a conversation, because I feel like that was the biggest storyline of the Imola weekend. We were talking about the change in drivers from Doohan to Colapinto, and then we were like, which one of you said it? We just hope that Colapinto doesn't go out there and like show the stuff that he was showing at the end of the Williams, where he was like crashing all the time. And what does Colapinto do? Crashes. So their question is, did Alpine make the right move?
I think the timing of this move is brutal on both Jack Doohan, and Franco Colapinto. Doohan for the obvious reasons that he's out of the seat. Colapinto because his first two races are at tracks where there is no forgiveness if you make a mistake. So Imola, okay, it's not a street circuit, but there's gravel traps there, there's grass lining the circuit. Slightest error and you're in big trouble. That wouldn't really have been the case around Miami. If they made the decision even earlier in somewhere like Bahrain, it wouldn't have been the case. But it's really being thrown in the deep end. And he was speaking about the accident afterwards. And, of course it was a mistake. And of course he just pushed too hard. But he also said that was the first time in qualifying in Imola where he'd pushed that car to the limit to understand it. Because in practice, he was learning so much, building things up, focusing on race pace. And then all of a sudden, you've got to put it all on the line in qualifying. And, that's what happens when you put a guy with 9 races experience in a position like that, and he's got to perform, and there's all the pressure, and it's a circuit that bites back. So the frustrating thing for him is that it's not going to be any easier in Monaco, and Monaco is a circuit that really rewards driver confidence. So your car can be very quick there for sure, but if the driver isn't confident to push it towards the barriers, leave millimeters rather than centimeters, then that's all lap time that's slipping away. And so Franco has that on his plate now as well. And I think that's pretty tough. So I've not really liked the way that Alpine have dealt with this whole situation from the start of the season. I think they could have been much more clear with Doohan from the start of the season to say, look, you've got your kind of 6 races and then we're going to make a decision. Instead, it seemed like they let him go to Miami, let him race in Miami, then told him that he was out. I don't think that was the right way of dealing it. And then of all the times to drop a driver in, I mean, there's never a perfect time, but this kind of run of races, Imola, Monaco, Spain's probably a little bit more forgiving, but Imola, Monaco, certainly, that's tough.
Yeah, you feel like Miami might have been the more logical one to give if you wanted him in the car this early. And that obviously was the rumor. So it's interesting to see how that got away. Yeah, I completely agree with Laurence. And the other thing I'd add as well is that, like, on the point about how they've managed it, Alpine have just basically massively ramped the pressure up on 2 drivers that, are young guys, rookies, trying to prove themselves. You feel like Franco Colapinto's come in now, and obviously, crashing was the one thing he couldn't do. But I feel like he's under so much scrutiny now because he's replaced Doohan, because of the nature of it. It feels like they've done exactly with him what they did with Doohan, where they've put like an X on his back already, and he's almost been set up to fail again. So you've got 2 drivers there who I don't think are going to get a fair shake of things. I mean, weirdly, Alpine are now saying it's not a 5-race rotation, are they? They've kind of, even though that was literally the first line of their own press release,
right?
And it was a quote from Flavio Briatore in that same press release as well. They're like, no, it's not 5 races. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's just weird. I don't know if it's too early to say if they've made the right call, but I think Laurence has alluded to it. I think they've made the wrong call in terms of the timing of it. I think Colapinto, from what we saw last year, was quite exciting at points. But yeah, I'm not sure if he's the full-rounded package they want to have And Monaco will actually be a good test of that, right? It's a place, if you're under pressure, you know, I mean, we saw with Mick Schumacher a few years ago, didn't we, in the house, when he absolutely destroyed that car when he was under a lot of pressure. And it's just a place where if you've got any doubt about yourself at all, it'll be exposed there. So yeah, big weekend for him, and he really needs to just have a clean weekend. Even if he finishes like 18th or 20th or something, I think that is actually a better weekend than sticking it in the wall in qualifying. Because you can say, well, look, he kept his tires away from that stuff, go to Spain, and almost start again from there. So yeah, under a lot of pressure, but I think too early to say it's the wrong call, but definitely didn't look like the smartest call when, minutes into Q1. Like you said, Nicole, I was actually watching on a delay, and I think your message came almost instantly as I was watching it. So I was like, wow, Nicole's quick. But I then remembered that I was watching on a slight delay as well. So, but yeah, pretty brutal way to start off for him.
But also, I think the thing for me they put Doohan in the car, and it was like they never gave him a fair shot. They never gave him a fair shake. He was always sort of like, when we did our preseason predictions, we were like, yeah, Colapinto is going to be in the car by Miami. Like, we guessed that he would be the first person to lose his ride this year. Were we wrong? Yes. But the point was, the point was like, we were expecting this. And so like the threshold for what is a successful stint, what is a successful 5-run races, what is it? Because in the end, there were things that Doohan was doing right, but the team was doing wrong. So it wasn't even like the Doohan was getting a fair shake. In the end, they'd already made up their mind. So when you look at Colapinto, yes, this was a mistake on Colapinto. But what if the same things start to happen to him that were happening to Doohan? Like, what's the threshold for a successful run in this car?
Yeah, and that's a really difficult question and the kind of unknown. It was interesting that Briatore, as Nate mentioned, kind of backtracked on that 5-race deadline for Colapinto when he was in Imola. Or I don't know whether backtrack is the right word. Maybe he never suggested that in the first place, and there was a miscommunication in Alpine. But either way, that I think needs to get sorted out and fully understood. The strange thing as well for me was that Doohan, while there were a lot of mistakes, and I think, if he looks back at it, he probably didn't go as well as he would have hoped, certainly. And I think you could justify a decision where perhaps you bring in a different driver. But the other thing with Doohan is that actually it was in Miami that he outqualified Gasly. So in terms of that pure pace, there was progress. And there's a danger now that Colapinto goes in, perhaps has a higher ceiling than Doohan in terms of potential performance, perhaps has a lower one. But it might also take 5 races for him to start to understand and start to be on Gasly's pace. And then if they change again, then it doesn't really make any sense. So it's almost like they're going through the same growing pains that they had at the start of the year with a new driver. But I think that was inevitable. The other strange one for me throughout this is what's the long-term goal with Colapinto, because Williams had that ability to potentially bring him back. He's still kind of on a Williams contract on loan to Alpine. What's their long-term goal there? Because if Williams in 2 years' time can say, Colapinto has become this brilliant driver because of his stint at Alpine, and Williams can just say, well, we want him back in the team because either Carlos or Alex Albon are moving on, then what have Alpine achieved in that? So there's so many strange questions about this right now, and I think it does speak to the slight mess that Alpine are in terms of their management right now, and how it all plays out, I'm not sure. And the annoying thing, I think, probably for Franco Colapinto and Jack Doohan at the start of the year is they're not entirely sure on what's needed either. The first one, though, would be don't crash, and unfortunately Colapinto did that in his first quali.
But just a quick one on that. Just to add to that, though, look at the other guy who's jumped into a team, Tsunoda going into the Red Bull, way more experienced, was waiting for that chance. Tsunoda's been pretty anonymous and had a similar thing where he crashed as well. So even giving these guys time, I think to Laurence's point, like, you've almost got to give a driver at least half a season or a full season before you really can make a call, I think, especially when they're a young driver. So, I thought it was just telling that Tsunoda and Colapinto both had crashes, and they're the two guys that have kind of jumped into a new team. Shows it's, whether it's 1 race in or 5 or whatever races in, still a really tough thing to do, to adjust in modern Formula 1 to that.
Is there a path for Doohan to get back in the car? Because it feels in a lot of ways like Alpine has just like napalmed his career. But also, like, if Colapinto isn't the answer after however many races they decide to give him, like, then what?
Yeah, I think there's got to be, right? Because he's still reserve driver. if they had cut him completely, I think you could quite safely say, look, he's probably done in Formula One. And they obviously gave him that seat last year. He had a head-to-head test with Mick Schumacher, and that's what prompted him to get that drive. That was before Colapinto was really on anyone's radar. So I think that there is still a belief that Doohan can do a job for Alpine in some capacity. I think that's telling, and the fact that the word rotation was used, wasn't it, in the press release, Laurence, if I'm not mistaken. It was, again, that was the one with the kind of the 5 race thing, but it still said rotational basis, which did suggest that there's either a mindset to put Doohan back in or a world where he does get back into the car. So I think that, and the fact that he's at races as well, he's still around the operation, etc. I think there is still a world he gets back in, but when does he get in? Does he get a run of races to kind of prove himself again in that situation? All very, very strange. And when is he coming back? Is he going to shove him back in the middle of, I don't know, Baku or something, like, where, and throw him straight into the lines then again? So it's a weird situation. But I could see a world where he drives again this year for sure. In fact, in my head, I think that is a potentially possible outcome just because of the way they've managed it so far. It would be very on brand for Alpine to be like, right, we're putting Doohan back in the car for a handful of races again, and we're just going to see how that goes.
I just like how we're like, does it make sense? No, cool. Alpine's going to do that.
Yeah. It's so on brand for them, isn't it? It's mad.
Yeah. Did you get a chance, Laurence, to talk to him at all last weekend? Because I'm really curious. I know there was a bunch of social media stuff got me, fake posts and whatever. But like, I actually really am curious as to like what, not just Jack, but like Mick, what they're thinking right now. Like when they saw Colapinto stick it in the wall the way he did, like, I don't know, like, it's just such a messed up situation.
Yeah, I think I didn't get a chance to talk to Jack Doohan. He wasn't doing any media, perhaps unsurprisingly, but he was visible in the paddock.
Yeah.
He was knocking around, and I think he'd also been on the simulator earlier in the weekend, helping the team still to get to a good setup for qualifying. Then he arrived at the circuit, which is exactly what a reserve driver normally does. And what was he thinking? Well, I imagine there probably is an element of vindication. It's like perhaps this car isn't quite as easy as some people felt to drive. And again, there's that inevitable thing that if you stick somebody in without much experience, you've got to allow them to grow. You've got to allow them to make mistakes. That's part of the deal. Formula One isn't easy at the top. It may look very easy when you've got the likes of Max Verstappen disappearing at the front, but it's really not. And of course, even drivers like Verstappen went through growing pains. They went through accidents at various races, early in their career to then get to the stage they're at now. So, Jack Doohan was very keen to point out that the screen grab that was doing the rounds on social media did not come from his father, and that had been fabricated by, it looks like, just some kind of
Troll.
Yeah, so some
Formula Fakers, I think they're called.
Yeah, it's called Formula Fakers. It's a Twitter account that actually remarkably I get notifications a lot of the time from that Formula Fakers account, even though I don't follow it, just like chucking stuff forward. But that is the world that we live in today. Social media can't be trusted quite often, and so that wasn't a direct quote or direct post from Mick Doohan, but you can imagine them looking and saying, hey, look, this is a tough job, it's a tough role, and then it kind of puts Jack's own mistakes in a slightly different light.
I mean, I know how I would feel. I know exactly how I would feel, and I know exactly what I would be thinking. And I can also probably say their silence is a lot better than what I would be.
Yeah.
I would be probably a little too mouthy. At this point, I don't even know, like, our producers refer to it as like a surprise, but at this point, I'm not even sure we can look at what Williams is doing and call it a surprise. It's a little bit more of an expectation at this point. But their big question is, like, when you look at all of the stories in Formula One right now, is like this Williams comeback and what they're doing week in and week out in the race and in qualifying. Is that like one of the best stories in Formula One right now?
Yeah, I think so. I've even prepared a hat,
especially
for this segment, one that Laurence would have had the other day. In solidarity with Williams. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love the Williams team. We were invited to the factory last week, Laurence and I, before I picked up this bad boy, And I think it's so impressive how James Vowles has turned that team around, you know, from where he took it over. You think like this time last year, they were, you know, they were struggling to bring two chassis to a race, you know, and they were having a sideline Sargent and you just race with Albon. So yeah, I think it is actually the best story in Formula One right now. You know, if you look at, and I don't know if you guys saw it, there was a great moment on Saturday. It was the Sky Sports coverage when Natalie Pinkham, Carlos Sainz was talking to, I think it was to Natalie Pinkham, Jamie Chadwick, and to, I forget who else was on stage with them. And she said, "Oh, you qualified ahead of the Ferrari," and you could see Carlos Sainz just could not hold the smile in, and he was like looking back, and like for him, it's so satisfying because we were all saying all year, weren't we? Oh, what a step down that is, going from Ferrari to Williams. Like, oh my word, like he's going from challenging for race wins to bottom end of the grid, and actually, he's sharing the same bits of road with Ferrari. You know, they've got a lot more points than Williams have, and they probably will finish the season with more points. But Williams right now look like a team that, you know, the Ferraris are used to seeing them on track. I mean, you know, Charles was fighting with Alex Albon at the end. So I think it's a great story. And I think anyone who grew up watching Formula One in the, like, you know, the 90s, but also the early 2000s, you know, we were all familiar with that era, right? When the Williams team, there was just something about it that made you want to root for them. And I feel like that again at the moment. You know, it's kind of, they've got that plucky underdog status about them. And actually, I think I'm not going to say they've got the strongest driver lineup, but I think that, you know, that driver lineup is, you know,
Really
one
good.
of the strongest in Formula One. I mean, Sainz, we know how good he is, but I think the way Alex Albon is driving as well is just phenomenal. He's taken such a step forward, and it feels like with Sainz arriving, it's almost leveled him up as well. So I think that's great. And I'll keep this hat on while Laurence talks about Williams. I might take it off.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it is a great story, and I think it goes to show the potential that is actually in a lot of these teams if they're run the right way. And James Vowles, one of the things he's talked about is how he got there and saw all these processes that were outdated and issues within the team and the way it was going about its business. And he looked at the way Formula One was going, and he targeted 2026 as the year that he really hoped to make a step forward. And so all the changes they've made have often been sacrificing short-term gains. In fact, almost always sacrificing short-term gains for getting the team in the right position for 2026. But just to prove the kind of work that's been going on and that it has been worthwhile, because sometimes long-term projects like that, you know, people can get a bit, you know, they can lose patience with it and they want results now. But just the very fact that these things have changed within the team have already brought about a significant step up this season. And I think that's great to see. But I honestly think a similar job could be done with Alpine. Aston Martin are certainly trying to put that together. I mean, we even saw the green shoots of recovery for Aston Martin with the latest upgrade that they brought to the track in Imola. The car all of a sudden looks very, very quick, and I actually think will be a constant thorn in the side for Williams going forward, because I think they have made a genuine step there. But it is interesting that, you know, when things just start to click in the right way, the team moves forward. And then the very obvious example of a team that has achieved that in recent years is McLaren, because if you look at where McLaren were, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, it was pretty bleak. And, you know, it really wasn't looking like a team that would fight for championships, you know, so soon. And yet they've managed to do that. So I think with that example there and what Williams have done so far, it's not absurd anymore to suggest that Williams could get back to fighting for victories in the next 3 years or so.
But I think that's the common thread there. If you look at what McLaren did, you know, after really Zach Brown became like the CEO and was promoted there, in 2016, there was a change in culture. There was a change in leadership. There was an expectation of accountability. And it doesn't happen overnight. Those things do take time. And obviously we saw McLaren do it. What I think will be interesting for Williams now is I think we talked about this last week. They might be slightly ahead of schedule. Like, I think all along they were targeting 2026, but they're sniffing now their potential. And so sometimes when that happens and you're ahead of schedule, you get a little frustrated when things don't go perfectly. So this same group of people that have just recently undergone like a massive change in culture, and they're dealing with the accountability aspects of it, like, how do they handle the adversity that's still to come? Like, they're not where they want to be yet. So like when they don't finish fourth, but they finished fifth and eighth, or they have the thing that they had in Miami where there was the miscommunication on the radio, however that played out. How do they handle that? And how do they keep it together without falling back into, at least for Williams, a really long history of maybe some bad decisions and like a bad culture? So how do they avoid that going forward?
Well, I think that's where the leadership is so important, and I genuinely believe in James Vowles. They've got the right person. Sometimes you'll do a press session with James Vowles, and he's, the way he just explains stuff, the way he talks about his vision for the team, you come away thinking, really believing what he says. And then you kind of put your journalist hat on and say, well, you've got to kind of analyze every detail of it. But I can imagine if you're in that team, then also, a lot of people have been in that team for a very long time. It's not a team that necessarily has had, they've had turnover certainly high up, but low down, there'll be a lot of people that are kind of lifers at Williams, and they'll know, they'll know the ups and downs, and some of them, and it's important for those people to be listened to as well, will remember the glory days of the mid-90s. Nate and I had that tour of some of their old cars the other week, and the guy giving us a tour had been a mechanic on various different drivers throughout the 90s, and had the memory that went back. So I think people who have the experience in F1 can see and know the way that the sport works, that you can have these real fallow periods where there's been mismanagement and opportunities have gone missing. But then when you have something good, when you have someone who has a true vision at the top, you have investors like Doralton who are willing to stump up the money to be able to bring the investment that's needed to push forward. That's when you're onto a good thing. So even if 3 races go by and there's 0 points to show for it, I think that stuff that's going on in the background will be an incentive for the team. And I think they've also done quite a good job at recruiting people recently. So, getting new people in, new ideas in, that all adds to a good culture going forward. But you're right, getting that kind of culture together, that winning culture, that belief that something is possible with that group of people and that facility, that's key. But from everything I've seen, they do have that.
They do have that. And it's like we talked about Sainz out qualifying the Ferraris and like the look on his face, but also like they're racing against each other on the track, which brings me to Ferrari, because once again, like the qualifying was abysmal. Both of them were knocked out in Q2. And yeah, they did rebound in the race. They were 4th and 6th. But again, like this isn't what they wanted. This is not what we expected of them. We expected them to be fighting for wins in the championship. And like, we thought this was Ferrari's year. Instead, it's like borderline crisis mode. Like I don't even know what the question is here. Like, how close are they to like just saying, you know what, 2026, forget about 2025. We have to focus on 2026. Because I don't want to say they're going to write off the season, but like, it's not great.
I feel like Ferrari can't afford to do that, as much as it might sound like the easy thing to do. There's so much has been invested, both in terms of money and emotion in Lewis. I feel like throwing that one of what could be 2 of his seasons away, it's a hard one to sell. But also as well, I just don't think that that's what Charles Leclerc wants to do. I don't think that, I think that we're now in a position where you start to question, if this carries on, how long does Fred Vasseur stay in the job? Ferrari's been very unforgiving about team bosses in the past. I think he's probably got a longer rope than like Mattia Binotto did have, because he's been hand selected by John Elkann, the president. But those things can change quite quickly. If the belief kind of gets shattered. So I think they have to just stay the course, and they have to. The thing is as well, they have to understand why this car has gone away from them, because last year it felt like they found the sweet spot with the car. It was good in qualifying, good in the race. And then this year, it just seems to have tipped that other way, where in qualifying, they just cannot get their heads around it. And I think we talked about it before with in a previous podcast with stuff Toto Wolff has said about Mercedes. It's like, well, we actually have to understand a lot about this year's car, because a lot of this stuff is going to transfer over to next year in terms of philosophies, in terms of why these upgrades we're doing aren't working. So as much as it's very easy for us to say, well, let's just throw the towel in and go to 2026, I don't think it's that simple. And I think they have to get to the bottom of this problem, because, you can carry a lot of this over to next season as well, whether it's on track or off track. If you've been taking a beating from the Italian press for a year, does that make you more prone to making decisions next season? Does it make you a bit more jittery about upgrades next season? So I think, especially when it's Ferrari as well, you have to just stay the course and they have to. I think they have to show the tifosi, they have to show the media, they have to show everyone we can come through a period like this right now and we can win races again, because that ultimately, I think, would do a lot more for them and for Lewis and for Charles than just throwing the towel in would. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like they have to kind of, just on a morale point of view, they have to get to grips with it. And I think there are reasons to be slightly optimistic in certain points, but the problem is the qualifying issue is such a fundamental one. It kind of ruins all their weekends, and they're having to do what Lewis did, on Sunday, which is kind of drive through the field with a quicker car and a different strategy. Can't do that every weekend. I mean, this weekend, for example, they're not going to be able to do that. So, yeah, I feel like there's better times coming, hopefully, for them. I mean, I think you're right, Nicole. It does feel pretty crisis mode at the moment. And if we get to the summer break and they're still in this kind of position where they're just the fourth quickest car. I mean, how many cars was it that out-qualified Ferrari at the weekend? It was 8, wasn't it? Seven different cars.
11th and 12th.
Yeah, but there were 7 teams ahead of them.
Yeah.
So, seven. Yeah, so there were 7 cars on the grid that were quicker. So I think it was only Haas and Sauber that weren't quicker than them. And obviously, people who really dig into that and pay attention will realize, well, that's the 2 teams with the Ferrari power unit. So it's not great, but I just don't think Ferrari can afford to throw the towel in this early. I mean, we were all saying Aston should do that, weren't we, as well, at one point? We're like, oh, maybe they should turn to 26. And then...
But Aston's not Ferrari.
True. That's also a very good point. But to that point, that's why I think Ferrari just can't afford to do that. It's such a defeatist thing to do. And if you do that and then you get next year wrong, it's that. I mean, that is a nightmare that teams just don't want to get into. So, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, Laurence might have a different opinion on that, but I just think they have to, at least until the summer break, they've got to keep pushing on with this car and seeing what they can get from it. Because last year, it took them a bit of time. And then by the summer break, they turned everything around.
And there are updates that Ferrari are talking about bringing. So we know they are still working on this issue. And it seems fundamentally an issue that has really been present since China, when Lewis Hamilton got disqualified from the Grand Prix for basically running the car too low. And that setup option, where they want to run the car, where the car is providing its most performance, doesn't appear to be available to them at the moment. And therefore, they're having to, redesign things to be able to put the car there and have it being able to finish races legally. And so when that update comes, I think you'll see them unlock quite a lot of performance in terms of qualifying. Well, at least that's what they're hoping for. And, there's a reason to believe that, because it seems to be based around this issue. It's never quite as simple as that. I'm sure there are other factors playing into the lack of performance as well. And it's not to suggest that all of a sudden they're going to be fighting with the McLarens and Max Verstappen's Red Bull at the very front. But then if you look at the race pace, both on Friday in terms of what they were doing in practice, and then in the race itself in Imola, it was pretty impressive. And I think they've, despite the issues they've got with this fundamental raw performance or lack of it, they've been able to put the car in a balanced position where they can start to get the most from the tyres. And we know from seeing how well McLaren have been able to manage that early in the year, how Red Bull made a significant step forward in Imola with that last weekend, how important that is to getting good results this year. And it feels like within the race, Ferrari have that. It's just that they need to be able to qualify further to then be able to make the most of that over the course of the race. So I would hold judgment on Ferrari a little bit until we see what they've got in terms of upgrades, whether it comes in this triple header, which I know they have some stuff coming. There was a little bit in Imola, but nowhere near as much as have been reported in some places, or whether it's even later, maybe Austria, Silverstone kind of time. And then I think, of course, by then, season's gone. I don't think anyone's expecting them to fight for championships, but Nate's right as well, because if you can start to understand some of these fundamental things and a better way of basically using the tyres, extracting performance from the tyres, that all follows into next year, even though we've got this big regulation change. But it will be interesting to see what they come up with. But I think they need the answers as well going into 2026.
To me, it's just the concept that they put themselves in last year and this year. It's like starting in a hole. They were behind and then they had to work their way out of the hole. But now the issues with qualifying put them in that same position week in and week out, because they're constantly fighting to get better. And you can't go into this coming weekend with the same issues. Like, you may be able to bounce from 11th to 12th to 4th and 6th respectively in Imola. That's not going to happen in Monaco. Which leads me to the stat of the week. It's brought to you by Oracle. Call that a transition, boys. Stat of the week is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. So the stat is Niki Lauda is the only Ferrari driver to win back-to-back Monaco GPs. It was back in 75 and 76. Leclerc won it last year. It feels slightly ridiculous even asking this question, considering how bad they've been in qualifying. But like, if you were to put a number on it, like how likely is it that Leclerc becomes the second Ferrari driver to do that? What would it be?
Are we put percentage? I mean, I would say something like, I'd say like a 25%. I mean, it is Monaco.
You're nicer than me. Okay.
Yeah. And I think they're going to have a pretty tough weekend, actually, all told. But it is a circuit where a driver can make a difference. And somebody like Charles Leclerc, I think, can make, whether it's enough of a difference. That's why I've put 25. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it'd be, what a story it would be, right? If out of all of this kind of malaise and all this criticism, we get a win in Monaco, because that's kind of what Ferrari's season needs. It feels like just like an injection of some goodwill a little bit. But maybe 25 is quite high. That is a 1 in 4 chance, I'm saying. So if we ran it 4 times, he'd win it once out of those 4. So maybe I'm being very generous.
I would think more like 15%.
Yeah. Laurence, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's pretty low, because realistically, I think you'd need both McLarens to be out of the race at the very least. But it is a strange race, isn't it, Monaco? I mean, the fact that Leclerc won it last year, well, their start to season wasn't anywhere near as bad as it's been this year. But even that was, kind of just everything going right, and the nature of that track just suited the car. And then actually, funnily enough, after Monaco last year was when Ferrari hit a real slump in terms of their performance. So strange things do happen around there, but I'd say it's low. I'd maybe go as low as 5%. So 1 in 20 races.
Even meaner than me.
I'm immediately regretting 25. I mean, look, someone's got to back Ferrari here, so I'll stick with 25.
Wait, who wrote the book on Ferrari?
I was going to say, it's right.
Before we dive too much into Monaco, I don't want to gloss over the fact that like Max won again, and the fact that like how Max got it done. If you were to talk about that overtake, how would you describe it?
I think Christian Horner's description of it was probably the best, which was win it or bin it. As in, you either make that work
0 to 0
free, or you don't. Now, the funny thing about that is actually, with hindsight, we realized that the Red Bull probably, in fact, was the fastest car at Imola over a race, which was counter to what we were expecting going into it. We thought the McLaren, as it has been throughout the start of the season, was going to be by far and away the fastest car, but the Red Bull was. But going into the race, Red Bull weren't aware of that. Max wasn't aware of that. And the one really good opportunity he had to make it stick, to take a victory against the odds, was to beat Oscar Piastri into that first corner. The start, the initial getaway from the line, went really badly for Max. I mean, not terribly, but he certainly wasn't where he expected to be. He lost a bit of ground to George Russell as well. And then Piastri, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what he was doing or what his thought process was. He said afterwards that he definitely hit the brakes too early, but I think he felt that Verstappen was covered, and we know how difficult it is to overtake around the outside in Formula One, especially now we have these new rules about being at the apex first, and then you're not kind of justified any space, or you're not you don't deserve any space on the outside on the exit. Max was able to send it around the outside of the first part of the chicane, and then did the rest from there, and it was exceptional. And that is, I think, still the difference between Max Verstappen and the two McLaren drivers. And it's why I kind of still stand by my preseason prediction that Max Verstappen will win this title, because he does stuff like that. He makes things happen. We've seen elements of that with Oscar Piastri, of course. Saudi Arabia, it was roles reversed. Max Verstappen started on pole position. Piastri got the move done into turn 1. But Max just does it so consistently and so well that I think it will be races like, if he does win it, it'll be races like that have absolutely made the difference.
But there are also things that we're seeing from the Red Bull, at least in terms of like the way Max is driving it, where they seem to be closing the gap a little bit. Like there was a bigger gap, I think, when the season started between Red Bull and McLaren. And even Andrea Stella has sort of intimated that he was surprised or maybe a little taken aback by the fact that that gap has closed as much as it has, at least when it comes to Verstappen and McLaren. Like, have they made enough to really close that gap where it's not going to be I guess my question is, there was a time when we were like, that Red Bull is not great, but that is not the case right now. And so for a while, it was like, whatever Red Bull gets, they're getting it because of Max. But now it seems more of like a dual effort. Am I wrong in thinking that? Has it been, is it just that much better and it's putting Max in like a better position?
There were two factors in Imola. One was the circuit, which definitely played to the strengths of the Red Bull. So Red Bull always felt that they were going to be a little bit closer to McLaren there. And then the other factor is this kind of two-stage update they had on Max's car in Miami and then new bodywork again in Imola. And that seems to have worked exactly as they wanted, which is addressing the balance issues, which was the problem that Max had talked about from the very start of the season, that he goes into a corner at 1 minute, it's understeering, then it goes to oversteer, and then, you might get a bit of understeer on the exit as well. Just kind of really hard car to shuffle through corners. And it seems that the latest upgrades have addressed that. And therefore, that accessibility of the performance, I mean, Max was able to access it anyway because of his exceptional talent, but now it's so much more readily accessible, means that Max can be more consistent. But the key factor there is that in the race, that allows them to look after the tyres much better. So even when Max was doing these amazing qualifying laps, like in Saudi Arabia, I mean, Japan was one where it really paid off, but Saudi Arabia was one where, he did this amazing qualifying lap on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday wasn't able to convert it into a victory because he just wasn't able to look after the tyres in the same way that the McLarens were. Same again in Miami, exactly the same issue. We saw Max really struggle with the tyres, whereas the McLarens were able to look after them. It now seems that Red Bull, at least at the start of understanding how to get a similar level of performance from the tyres throughout a stint. The question is, what if we go to a completely different circuit? Will that balance still be where Max wants it? Will it still be able to look after tyres? Well, we'll get some answers in Monaco, but Monaco is so much the opposite to Imola in terms of slow speed corners and it's kind of just idiosyncrasies that don't exist anywhere else on the calendar. It might not be the perfect answer. So even if the Red Bull really struggles there, doesn't mean that they're back in trouble. But if the Red Bull is quick there, I think then we're really starting to see, okay, wait a minute, here we go. This is a real chance for a championship challenge.
Is this the weekend? Okay, so you've thought all along that Max was going to win the championship this year. Nate, do you think that this is the weekend where maybe Lando continues to struggle and that Max continues to be Max and like maybe he takes over in terms of like the standings? I mean, I'm not in front of Oscar, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I totally know what you mean. I mean, Monaco, because of the aura around Monaco and just, the fact that it is a special race, I think winning in Monaco after doing Imola, I think would be a massive statement from Max. And McLaren then have to. We've talked a lot, haven't we, about how McLaren can't put all of their eggs into one basket. They've got two drivers very, very close together. We obviously have this thing coming up in Spain where they're clamping down on the front wings. We're not sure how big that's going to be, but it could well help change those gaps that Laurence was talking about again. So yeah, I think to be honest, I think he's already made a statement with the win in Imola and the win in Japan. But I think Monaco would be the underline. If he can beat the McLarens or even beat one of them this year, it's kind of a reminder that I'm going to be under your skin all season wherever we go. And yeah, I think whether there's too many races where McLaren I think are probably just going to have a bit of an advantage, I think that will probably tell as the year goes on. But crucially, as we've said, he's going against two guys that are that are sharing points at the front. I don't think McLaren are fully committed yet to super aggressive race strategies out in front. If you look at the way they've had to manage their races, they've had to be quite careful with them just to to make sure both guys are getting kind of a fair shake. And I think that also opens the door. It opens the door for any team, but when you've got Max driving, it's just another layer on top of how good he is. So yeah, in terms of off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact gap now between Verstappen and Lando, but I mean, imagine that if we went to Spain and Max is right there on the shoulders of Norris, no one would have predicted that in Australia. And yeah, I think this season, and I think the end of last year as well with the drive in Brazil, it just seems to be adding to the kind of the aura and the legacy of Max, doesn't it? Every single race, we've just got more
points, by the way.
How many?
9.
9. So there
My
you go.
math
So
is correct. 9.
yeah,
Don't trust my
no.
math,
So
but 9.
I mean, it's very very doable. If he won the race and Lando finished third or lower, then he's up there, and that's not beyond the realms of possibility. If you just keep changing the order of the front three, it could be Max beats the McLarens. So yeah, I think the great thing about this spell of the season is we're going to leave the Spanish Grand Prix in a week and a half from now, and I think we're going to know properly what the season looks like. And I think I'm starting to think that Laurence had it right all along, because I said Lando was going to win, and I've thoroughly now do not think that is the case.
I don't even remember who I said, but I'm pretty sure I was wrong. I'm pretty sure I didn't.
I did.
I feel like I may have said one of the Ferraris.
Potentially, but then again, at the start of the season, I think that was a fair guess.
That was a fair guess.
Because where they finished last season as well.
Is there a driver this weekend? Honestly, I'm really just looking at those three. If you're looking at Piastri, if you're looking at Lando, if you're looking at Max, which one of those three is under the most pressure this weekend?
I'd say Lando.
I'd still say Lando. It's been a rough few races. I think there'll be some confidence he gained from Imola, the pass on Oscar Piastri towards the end of the race. Of course, he had a big tyre advantage, which is how he made it happen. But the pressure's still on Lando at this stage, just because of the two McLarens. He's not the one ahead. And and as you said, Max Verstappen just 9 points behind. Is not a comfortable place to be, no matter what the situation in the championship, if you've got Max Verstappen that close to you. So it's definitely on him to perform. But I think with Lando, the one thing that's been consistent throughout the last few races, and the one thing that he can hold on to, is that there is still an indication of the performance there. It's not that far off Oscar. It's very occasionally ahead, but it kind of goes missing a bit in Q3 because there's this numbness in the way the car handles when it's absolutely on the limit, and Lando's really struggling to get his head around that. But McLaren have also said that they're aware of that issue. It's something they're trying to address. So if Lando can just stay in touch at this part of the season, just keep Oscar close enough, and then he gets a car that's more to his liking in the second half of the year, perhaps that will be enough for him to remount a championship. But this weekend, the pressure's on him, I'd say, of those three.
This weekend is a little bit different because we go to the 2 mandatory pit stops for this race. Like, how is that actually going to change what we see on the track? Like, is it going to make a significant difference in the parade that we normally get?
It's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking about this the other day. Because Laurence will probably give a much better answer than me on this, but my fear is that it just organizes the procession a bit more. A bit more logically. It's like, and now there's 2 stops, and there might what you get. You'll get a bit more chaos in the pit lane. You'll get a bit more changing around, because let's face it, these guys are. The problem we have at the moment is the Pirelli tires aren't really great for giving a bunch of different strategic options. I'm not sure what they're bringing to Monaco, but it seems to be a theme of the season that there's not really a huge amount of difference you can do. It's not like you've got 3 tires where all the drivers are like, hey, I could start on any of these tires and go. Maybe that is different with this mandatory stop, but my feeling is it's gonna give even more of a reason to kind of criticize the spectacle and kind of do Monaco down for a week afterwards. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, Laurence, what do you think? Is it gonna make it the best race of all time?
I very much doubt that. And I'm not convinced it's gonna have a magical impact or whatever, but I'm glad they've done it, because it does throw in a few more variables. Because in Monaco, the best races there happen around incidents or basically things that go wrong, and pit stops are never straightforward for Formula 1 teams. They make them look like it, but there's a lot going on there, so there's that extra chance for error, mistakes, variability there. And then I think what's going to be fascinating is that if a car qualifies out of position, so let's say Lewis does qualify 12th again, would they pit after the first lap to get one of those pit stops out of the way? Because then you'll drop to the back 100%, you'll be 20th place, or with anybody else who makes the same decision. But then everybody ahead of you have still got to make 2 stops, and you've only got to make 1. You then push really hard because the tyres should be good enough to be able to hold on for potentially a 1-stop race around there, if that's essentially what you're creating by pitting very early on. Then you get a safety car, for example, and then you pit with everyone else, but they still have to make an extra pit stop. So you're then in that position. And it also may prevent the issue, which I think often makes Monaco Grand Prix so boring, is that the leader of the pack will just monitor the pace and slow everything down, because they don't have to push that hard. They know that there's no incentive to, because they're probably going to trigger the pit stops, or somebody else will behind them, and then they'll pit the lap after, and then that's job done, and you go through to the end of the race, and you almost win the race at the slowest pace possible. But with that possibility that some guys go super early, and you've got to keep an eye on those, you might actually want to push harder this year, because you don't want that person who pitted really early being able to catch up with the pack naturally, or with a safety car or whatever. You might then have an incentive to push harder. So the more the drivers push harder as well, the more likely they make mistakes, and then you have those pivotal moments that sometimes make a great Monaco Grand Prix. I'm just interested to see how it pans out. It's an extra element. Everyone knows that racing in Monaco is incredibly tough. You're not going to change that. The cars are still huge. The track is still narrow. None of that is changing, but you do add a little variable that at least this year might put in a curveball. And then you also have this thing where probably have even softer tyres this year. So they'll have the C6, which is the same compound that was used in Imola and was absolutely useless in the race. I think it'll be much better in the race in Monaco in terms of being a usable compound. But again, it's that third option of a tyre that perhaps might make sense to put the pressure on somebody else or whatever. So yeah, I think there's going to be just more to keep you watching in case something comes about, or because somebody made an early, interesting off-the-wall decision, will that actually pay off? So that's the optimist in me. And I think that was the logic in the decision that they made when they decided to do this mandatory two-stop. But the reality could be very different. And as Nate said, it could be very dull.
I'm just hoping, it's like you said, it's a variable. So there is a chance for it to be an agent of chaos. And like, let's say there's weather or whatever, it just becomes a thing. And it seems more likely that there's a chance for it to be less of a parade, just given that there's one more variable out of it. Do I think it's going to be the greatest race in the world? No, I do not. But it's Monaco. And we've talked about this before. There are certain races that require respect because they're revered, they're a part of history. And to me, Monaco is Monaco without it being a great race. It's still Monaco. And I personally don't care what the race looks like. Just do a good job in qualifying. There you go. Go win it on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the best. Qualifying in Monaco is one of the best days of the whole season.
It is.
Yeah, so it's that day alone, I think, justifies it being there. One quick one. My fear I have with this two-stop thing, if it does end up creating a great race, you've effectively admitted that we had to gimmick the Monaco Grand Prix to make it good. And I mean, to be fair, if part of me thinks maybe Monaco should just be different to the rest, maybe you should say, look, Monaco, we do this. It is different. Like it or lump it, this is what it's going to be like. But that's my fear, is that I think there is a crowd of people that are just I hate Monaco, whatever. I find it frustrating how the races are, but I'm actually quite excited. I'm hopeful that I'm wrong about the dull outcome from the two stops.
I think the danger the danger with the gimmick is if you open the door to a gimmick being successful, let's not sit here and pretend that every race is great. So if you're opening the door to a gimmick you're essentially opening the door to a gimmick at all. But it's a very slippery slope.
Is it a gimmick because every other race has a mandatory single pit stop because you have to use two compounds? Is that a gimmick as well? Because there's certain races where you could just stay on the same tyres all the way to the end. That would be the purest form of motor racing. But they already have a mandatory pit stop all these other places. It's just that this one is a two-stop. Then you have DRS has long been derided as a gimmick, but if you didn't have it, they wouldn't be able to take in a whole bunch of circuits. So I feel like, yes, maybe, but one, I'm glad that F1 is trying new ideas. There was a stage when, probably 20 years ago or so, it seemed like there was a real reluctance to do anything to try and make it more exciting. But yeah, I think give it a go. And look, if it does work and we understand the reasons why it works, then that's a great lesson for making the sport more exciting. And if you do make it mandatory two stops elsewhere, I honestly don't think that's the way it will go. And I don't think that's necessarily a good idea because different circuits require different things for racing. Then you've learned and you made the sport better. But we already have mandatory one stops at every single race we go to. So is a mandatory two stop that different? Yeah. I don't think so.
But now you're just using logic, so whatever.
Yeah. Overly logical. I can't deal. I've got nothing to say back to that.
I honestly I was thinking about this. I was thinking about it's sort of like Formula One and IndyCar related. The amount of money that was like written off in cars this last weekend between the Colapinto crash and Yuki's crash. And then you look at, because it was Indy 500 qualifying, you look at the cars that crashed there, the big cars. It was just like a very big dollar sign weekend. Okay. Our predictions remain trash.
Can I just say, I was very close to getting a top 3. I was like 5 laps away from getting a top 3 spot on.
Yes, you were.
Yeah. I didn't.
You and I had the top 3.
Yeah.
You and I had the top 3 correct, just in the wrong order. You were
well, remarkably, we all did. Yeah.
Oh, that's right, we did.
It was
I'm
only
looking at
you
it
and I
now.
that got a single driver in the right place.
Yeah, you got the winner correct. So Laz had Max winning.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Impressive backing him.
we did not. So Laz got a point, I got a point because I picked Lando to finish second. And then Nate, your order, you just had them wrong. So I still lead the way. I have all of 7 points. And then you two are now tied at 5. Big weekend. Make some moves. Nate, you're on my screen. You get to go first. Who are you picking?
I am going to do what Laurence did last week. I'm going to back Max. Let me go in reverse order.
So is this 3, 2, 1 or 1, 2, 3?
Sorry, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Lando, Piastri, Max. So I would, well, not what we had the weekend, but
Yeah.
a similar theme to the season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like with where Max is right now, and given how good, he's been in quali, I can see him putting it on pole or putting it on the front row, and just kind of, just doing Max stuff in the race. So yeah, that'd be my 3.
Good. What are you thinking, Laurence?
I'm going to go Lando Norris in 3rd place, Max Verstappen in 2nd, Oscar Piastri in 1st. I think Oscar, when McLaren didn't really have a car for Monaco last year, was still quite impressive. So I can see him winning here. And he has, despite what happened in Imola, I think the performance was still there, wasn't he? He still had pole position, and the race just didn't go his way. But I think in Monaco he can turn around. So yeah, Oscar's to win.
So I had my first 2 written down before we started this conversation, and then I decided to wait on my 3rd just to see if I needed to make something different. I also have Oscar winning it, and Max 2nd, and I think I'm going to go with George in 3rd.
I was considering George.
Just to mix it up, just to be different, just to, because I've got that whole 2-point cushion.
Got to make it work for you.
Exactly. All right, that's what we're going with. Guys, thank you very much for listening. Remember, you can leave a comment, hit us up with that like button, hit us up with the 5-star review, and don't forget to subscribe to the ESPN F1 channel on YouTube. That's where you can get F1 content, not just during the season, but 365 days a year. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. We'll see you after the weekend, guys.